Hello everyone, welcome to Green IO, the podcast for responsible technologists building a greener digital world, one bite at a time. Our guests from across the globe share insights, tools and alternative approaches enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. You might have heard about artificial intelligence this last month. Yeah, sorry about the joke. But you might also have heard about the rising concern about the environmental footprint about artificial intelligence and data growth. Actually, I recorded a full episode with Jerry McGovern and Katie Singer in January about what they call data tsunami. And since then, we've seen new studies about the water consumption of ChatGPT, about the electricity consumption, training and requesting these artificial intelligence models that have started to raise concerns about the sustainability of these new technologies. But on the other end, I'm bombarded with articles, posts, and discussion with peers and clients about the expected benefits of AI for humankind. So I reckon this question is on a lot of tech practitioners today. How to leverage AI and data to regenerate the planet and our societies rather than destroying them. And to answer it, I decided to ask people I could trust to tell more about data for good, for real. And by real, I mean without overlooking all the impacts of using AI, including the negative ones. And believe me, Lou, Theo, and Anastasis are to be trusted. Lou and Theo founded Data for Good in France 5 years ago. Today, this community gathers more than 3,000 data scientists and data engineers doing pro bono work for NGO and nonprofit. And Data for Good has been making headlines in early November with their job on 4022 climate bombs worldwide and which companies and banks are supporting them. But that's something Data for Good has been familiar with. Just last year, Lou was listed among the 100 thought leaders who give meaning to technology in France, Kudo, and CEO was getting attention with the climate Q&A using ChatGPT, but trained only with IPCC reports. And it was important to me to have another point of view than a French one in this episode, and Anastasis Stamatis was the perfect match. Thanks to the Climate Fresk Network, I discovered the founder of Dataphoria in Greece and his amazing track record in the impact business sector, most of them powered by AI. So welcome, Lou, Theo, and Anastasis. Thanks a lot for joining Green IO today. That's our third attempt to get a recording, but this one will be the good one.
Hello, everyone.
Well, hi.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Before we jump in the both bright and dark side of AI, I would like to ask a very simple question, but a very tricky one. Where are we with artificial intelligence in the world? What's really the spread of AI in both tech companies, but in regular companies, governments, etc.? And is the technology moving that fast? How much is hype and how much is really big acceleration?
It's an interesting question because it's been like a year that, of course, ChatGPT has come out around almost a year now, and it's changed a bit how people see AI. And with it, we at Data for Good, we created a white paper on generative AI, and we actually discovered that a lot of people in the general public didn't really know the history of AI and still had a lot of misconceptions about the topic. And a lot of people, for example, don't know that AI actually has been around for more than 80 years and has had a lot of waves and evolutions around the years, has already enabled to do lots of stuff. For example, I always say when we explain about the topic that Google search has been using the Transformers technology, which is in ChatGPT for more than 7 years in production already every day. So people are using AI every day in their Google search. And this has been like a constant evolution for the past 80 years, even if there has been some increasing pace at some points in history. But still, there is something new about today, which is for me, the general public adoption about those technologies, which is something that is has actually struck a lot of people by surprise, by the fact that it was not especially something that different. Of course, we can do a lot of things a lot better since we have access to generative AI technologies. But still, it was only the fact that like 200 million people now use ChatGPT every day that was a big change. And people now were able to actually test it, and that made them even want to learn more about the topic. So this is actually not a technological outbreak or like a complete shift in what was feasible for me, but more something that now is accessible and people know that it's not something obscure, but that they can use it. And with it, there is a question of exponential. That's when you talk about environmental issues, every time there's an exponential like this, there's a question. So there's a part of hype and a part of constant evolution for me.
And I think maybe to complete what you're saying, what's interesting, what you were saying about the fact that people now are more aware that it's here. I feel like in the tools that we're using, there's often functionalities that tell you ask AI to do this or to do that. And this is a shift from before where there was AI, but we were not talking about it and most people were not seeing it. And maybe now it's a bit more visible than before, because since like there's been this breakthrough in generative AI, we have the feeling as users that we're talking and that we're using it in a much more maybe like a relation almost. So I think it's to complete what Theo was saying is that it's more visible than before and it's breaking through much more much faster than before.
And Anastasis, is it a trend that you analyze this way as well, that the breakthrough is more on the public adoption than purely technological side?
Absolutely. So it's more on the democratization of AI. It has reached massive amounts of users compared to previous applications of all sorts. And I think that's where the risk might be, because our reaction time is limited with regards to the massive adoption that is happening all around us. And yes, we have been using AI over the past years without even realizing it in our phone, in the way we consume the news. Even some news we might have read were generated by AI, but now it is all around us and there is all this public sentiment around it. And with it comes a lot more data that needs to be used. And with AI being so massively in production, also the infrastructure requirements and the electricity and technology requirements are becoming bigger as well.
And you mentioned that it's more public adoption than technology, but if you read many articles, if you listen to many thought leaders, it's more like everything has changed, since GPT-3 or since even ChatGPT or GPT-4 or whatever. And actually, that's not truly the case. It has more been a trend, but it creates a massive hype that, everyone needs to put AI in everything. I mean, it's exactly as you said, Lou, that stuff that were done by machine before without acknowledging that it was artificial intelligence suddenly needs to be labeled as AI because it's better to sell. So I still see this massive hype wave, and that leads me to another question, but a similar one. How you spot hypeist, I would say. I've just made this word, but I love it. So how you spot hypeist and how you spot true thought leaders. Who do you follow actually, and who do you believe are speaking good sense about what is going on the AI field at the moment?
I think honestly, I have one simple rule that worked quite well. Is it a new labeled expert that has been around for less than a year? That means that he only knew ChatGPT as what he thinks is AI, and actually, it's most of the time it's a he and not a she. And the people that have been around for many years, and especially that are scientists and engineers in the field of AI that have been applying AI in production, which is a bit different than doing a prototype using ChatGPT or just embedding such technology in your product. And at the end, after you confronted the buzz, there is a question of user adoption, and we think, I think already a year after, now they have been, like, of course, adoption by users, but there have been also a lot of deception on the topic. People are using it less for mundane tasks. Developers are using it a lot, but there are already a lot of people that have tried it and now feel that they don't have a use for it. So, and that's normal. And that's a lot coming from people that are not just like experts on the topic, but just saw this trend and put it in their products. So at the end, what I'm following people mostly, I love people like Hugging Face, for example, that are probably the one that have been advancing the most the field in open source. And I'm spending like 1 hour a day on their platform to see the latest innovations and papers and following the people that are within, because they are probably gathering a lot of people that actually have the same value that we have at Data for Good, but at a wider scale. So that's, I would say, that those are the people I'm following.
On my side, I would say I'm not following experts, but rather the important thing for me is really the purpose of the algorithm that's used. So what's really important for me is, beside the technology, what is it aimed at, and is it going in the right direction or in the wrong direction? And spoiler, I feel like 95% of the usages that are made today of ChatGPT are just going in a way that make us buy more stuff or do more things that we don't need to do. So that's why I'm really focused on the usages that are going to benefit for all. And I think there are some, and I'm not going to make some internal publicity, but I think the tool that Theo developed, that's called Climate Q&A, that helps you navigate through IPCC reports and make climate data accessible to citizens and to people that want to understand the problem, but don't have the time to read 14,000 pages of climate reports. These kinds of usages to democratize knowledge are amazing. And this is the kind of things I follow.
Wow, hats off to Theo for this tool, which I'm going to definitely be checking out after our session. Just to add to that, I guess like the most important thing in my aspect is if someone is being generally objective about AI, does not treat it like a silver bullet. Usually what we get out of the hype is people claiming it will change everything, it will save the world, it will destroy the world. And I don't really like dealing in absolutes in that sense. Definitely many hardworking people in the industry for loads of years, most of whom know how difficult it is to collect the data, to label the data, to train the right models, and how difficult it is to actually get a good, trustworthy result out of AI. So yeah, AI is hard. It's very burdensome to get the right results, and most people who would tell you that, yeah, they would find no silver bullets and no extreme hype and absolutes in that.
And Anastasis, if you had to pick one name, who would it be?
I think I would go probably back to basics, back to a person, one of the people who started all of this, who started the hype behind AI, behind data science as well, and that would be Andrew NG, very well known in the community, and he's one of the voices that has been there from the beginning, actually.
Thanks a lot, Anastasis. And the two others know that I'm going to ask the same question, but actually, I'm pretty sure I can do a bit of a mentalist exercise with Theo. So if you had to pick one name, Theo, who would it be? And my guess, it will start with an S.
That's a good person to follow, for sure. Sasha Luciani. She was a researcher at Mila, this is a university in Canada, and she was one of the people, and actually the only one in the world to create a research paper on the carbon footprint of AI. And that is the only resource we have today to estimate what is actually emitting. And she has been like doing a lot on AI ethics and AI carbon footprint. She also created a tool that we use, and now we maintain at Data for Good to measure the carbon footprint of AI. So and now she works at Hugging Face. So yeah, that's one of our model.
And Lou?
Well, I was going to say the same person, so it's not fun.
Oh my god, that's super bad. We stole your hero. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so the fun fact is that I really wanted this episode to start on a positive note and focus on data for good. But what is really interesting is, despite the fact that you are working on very positive application of AI, the three of you started right from the start about, hey, cool down, there are some downsides as well, etc. So, okay, you know what? You won. I will not have such a positive episode, or at least not yet. And let's talk about AI as a destructive.
No, I wanted to complete what
Yep.
you were saying because I think it's really important, and the reason why we're doing it, why we're doing that, is that we're facing um, uh, speeches in the media or people that all AI experts. They're like in 90% of the cases, they're talking about AI and technology in general, like something that is going to save us, and like behaving as if we can continue exactly the same pace that we're having. We just need to change our technology behind it and we're going to be saved. And I think, especially when you work in this field and you are aware of all the limits of those technologies, we really, well, I feel like I have a role to really, each time I have the possibility to talk in public, to remember and to remind all those limits, because they're huge and we need to say it. They are positive cases and they're amazing in science and all the projects that we can do at Data for Good, but they're not the majority. And this is really important to be said when the occasion is happening.
So technocracy won't save the world. I'm under shock. But could you elaborate a bit with maybe one example? Like, because if I understood you well, that's really the question of, with such a powerful tool, where are we accelerating towards? And are we accelerating in the right direction? Or I would say the other side of the same coin is, well, just drop a pinch of AI everywhere and it will solve the entire world's problem. So, do you have some specific examples that you would like to share when you really believe that a terrible idea to use AI for?
So, well, basically, when we're talking about technology, I think what is really important to bear in mind is the materiality of this world that we believe is immaterial. For instance, I think it's really funny that we're talking about the cloud as if it was something in the sky that was really not material at all, when we know that, for instance, 99% of the data that we exchange worldwide, they're circulating through submarines cables, and then they're stocked into like monsters of metals. So everything is material, and so when we talk about technology, we need to remember that there are two sorts of impacts. The first one, they're direct, the materiality of it that I was talking about, and then there are also all the indirect effects. And one of the major one is called the rebound effect, and it's the fact that every time that we have discovered or improved a technology, like used technology to improve the usage of something, in the meantime we've increased its usage, and then as a result we the absolute emissions are always bigger. So for instance, in our daily lives, we have the example of the planes, because for instance we've reduced the intensity per passenger, but we've increased hugely the number of flights, and so the absolute emissions are way bigger. And so for generative AI and AI in general, it's really the same thing happening. For instance, to take an example, we can take as an example the fact that it's going to it helps you write emails way faster, but at the same time, it's going to make you maybe be able to make much more emails. So if the objective of your emails is to send stuff, so maybe you're going to be able to sell much more stuff. We can do the same for another example that I like a lot is the example of publicity. So you can make much more, you can personalize much more the advertising that you're going to make. And so in the end, you can make it faster, but so you're going to sell much more stuff. And these examples are like, actually, I didn't find a counter example today. Maybe somebody has it, but I don't.
And Anastasis, do you have a counter example? Well, actually, no, let's stick with the negative force. Would you like to comment on what Lou shared about the rebound effect, about accelerating in the wrong direction, just selling more stuff?
Oh, absolutely. And I feel this is like another facet of consumerism that's been evident in our days. And especially since if we do flood the internet with AI generated copies of emails and advertising texts, then guess what the next models will be trained on and what degradation that might produce in the future. So again, some elements that people should consider. When I say people, just to get back to that technocratic aspect of what we discussed, what I'm sort of feeling leads the destructive force behind AI is limited knowledge and limited engagement with the risks and the dangers around artificial intelligence. Data centers, cloud computing, the energy they produce. That's the essence of your show, Gail. So we've been exploring this throughout other episodes. What happens when we try to apply AI without the relevant data? I mean, all of us are working at least to a certain part in climate change. We have two great aspects, global north and global south. Some climate change solutions embedded with AI should apply to the global south as well. But most of the data come from the global north. So you end up trying to do good, but you might end up applying solutions where they have actually no applications because you've trained them with wrong data sets. All these are dangers and risks that we as a community should be informed of, should be informing people of, and democratizing this knowledge. When people apply AI or use AI, there should be a way for them to know what to use and what not to use. Just a way when you use the electricity or you use the water, you're aware of the dangers, you're aware of what to do, what not to do. It should reach a point where it is the same thing with artificial intelligence. That's how we can de-risk it and stop it being a sort of destructive force through its application.
And actually, listening to both Lou and you, Anastasis, I realize that people are seeing the data that is needed to train any data algorithm a bit like the cloud. It's some kind of magical, and they don't really challenge the materiality of the cloud, and they don't really challenge the materiality of the data we need to use. And that creates this huge bias that you've mentioned. And actually, I think it's a very important bias. It's not an environmental bias, but yeah, if you train data mostly based on US behaviors and you try to apply with, Madagascar, just to pick, my neighbors, that can create a lot of issues. And that's funny that this hype and all this magical thinking around AI tends to overlook this aspect. I mean, am I right rephrasing it this way?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And technology in itself nowadays is political. It has been used as a political tool. So we, the users of technology, have to be political as well. The way we use it makes a statement, leaves its footprint on the world based on our ethics, our responsibility. So we do have to claim this responsibility.
Theo, you mentioned earlier that Sasha Luciani was the only one who wrote a research paper on the environmental footprint. That's something that both Anastasis and Lou mentioned several times, that we also need to pay attention to the electricity consumption and I guess much more. Could you elaborate a bit? What do we know today about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence?
This is important because that's also where you see what you can do actually in terms of negative impacts. I think there are three misconceptions about the environmental impact of AI. The first one is that actually we don't know what is the environmental impact of AI. We don't have the data for it. We have ideas for it. We know that it consumes energy and water, and we have a lot of data over there, but no one actually measured it aside from a few people in the world. So we just don't know. But what we know, second misconception, I'd say, is that people tend to focus on the carbon footprint and the energy consumption of data centers, which for me, and I will give some figures, is actually not that important. And especially people in AI, because it has been the case for a lot of years, think that it has to come from the training phase is the most important phase. And the third misconception is that they always forgot the indirect impact. So let me give you a few figures. We think we know that GPT 3.5 has been trained and consumed during the training phase and emitted around 500 tons of CO2. 500 tons of CO2, it's quite big, but it's not huge. It's like it would be a small company of a few, maybe 10 to 30 people, or it's around 250 flying back and forth to New York, which is actually, if you divide that by 200 million users, it's actually nothing. One thing that is not is the second direct impacts is actually the use of AI. Before, because we had a lot of technologies that were actually trained and used, and the usage phase were actually not that in like consuming energy. But with the transformer technology that we have already, that we have now in the generative AI techniques, actually the inference phase, the usage phase, is as emissive as the training phase. So if you scale it to 200 million users per day, that's becoming quite a thing. And we did the exercise in our latest white paper at Data for Good. If you do the exercise, you find that it's around, for GPT 3.5, around 100,000 tons of CO2. But even that, for me, if we only take that into consideration, we forget a lot of things. There was one study by McKinsey that we actually did a work on that say that generative AI will just add to the economy 4,000 billion in the GDP worldwide every year. And that it means that in each sector, you will have an increase in revenues. And if you take for each sector the decarbonization trajectory, you can do a small calculation that it will mean that it would be emitting around 2 billion tons of CO2 every year. And 2 billion tons of CO2 now, it's not negligible at all. It's around 5% of the global emissions worldwide. And this is exactly a figure that represents the fact that with generative AI, people think that we will accelerate an economy that is not decarbonizing so much that it will be actually emitting 5% more of CO2 every year. And this is why we actually tend to focus on the finality of the algorithm. What are you using it for? And especially stopping using it for marketing and publicity, or even fossil fuel extraction, actually, and start using it only for good.
Which makes a beautiful transition, because we don't know that much what is the impact, and still we try to use it for good. So can we try to switch now, because the alerts are crystal clear about bias with data, accelerating in the wrong direction, all the political entanglement that you can see. But the three of you, you've managed, well, actually, you tried to use it as a force for good. So let's get our hands a bit dirty. Can you pick a project where you say, okay, I'm going to use AI. I'm going to challenge myself about the direction. I'm going to also challenge myself about the intensity of the energy, the water usage, etc., trying to reduce it?
Maybe I can illustrate with an example, which is one of my favorite ones that we're doing right now at Data for Good. We've been helping an NGO that's called Bloom for several months now, and this NGO is focused on protecting the ocean and the marine life. And what we've been doing with them is helping them track the biggest boats on the sea and being able to identify when they were fishing in zones that they were not allowed to. So in this case, we've really used algorithms and artificial intelligence to develop algorithms that will help us detect, depending on the boat's trajectory, whether they were fishing or not, and then match it with the geographical zones in which they were identified to be, to see if they were in a protected area or not. And when we match the two information on whether they're fishing or not, and if they are in a protected area or not, we can know if they are violating some rules. And since we've been doing this work, we know that Bloom has been filing more than 20 complaints at international level in order to denunciate those illegal fishings. And here we feel that we haven't totally measured the impact of CO2 of those algorithms compared to the benefits that they procure. But what we're sure is that protecting marine life is way more important than the few electricity that those algorithms are generating.
Maybe I can continue on the data for good examples. We have a framework to see if a project is actually for good or not. Not talking about the moral aspect of it, but we try to be quite logical. But the one thing that we actually always see that is working well, and if we don't do it, it won't actually have a real, not being a real force for good, is, as Lou was saying, deploying it in the field and not staying at the level where it's only a geek thing, where we just produced something that could be used. And we put it in open source and we say, we created a great thing, just use it and now you will be for good. Now, what we discovered that we're actually delivering our impact when we are putting our tools and what we develop in the field. A few other examples that not only on the fishing side, was one project that we did with an NGO called Pioneer, which is detecting forest fires before it's too late for the firefighters to intervene. And at first, we created just an algorithm to detect it with computer vision from small cameras that were quite sober and frugal, but it was just that. But the moment that the project completely switched and actually became a force for good is that when we actually made the contact with the firefighters, with the people managing forests, so that we can actually implement it. And at the end, it raises alerts with the firefighters. And as soon as the project now has the full life cycle, it's actually now starting to really prevent fires. And if we hadn't been doing that, we'd had nothing. Another examples, we worked a lot with another NGO called Kota Climate, which is basically monitoring how people speak in the media about the ecological transition. So it's counting the quantity and the quality of interventions in the media and ranking TV and radio chains together to see who has been talking about what topic and having some barometers to see the evolutions. And at first, same thing, we created algorithms and we created some LinkedIn posts and it was good and we had a lot of buzz with it. But the project actually started to become quite important when, with our work, with the KPIs that we produced, this NGO created a task force to change the regulation around media and the ecological transition. And we always see that aspect where if we stick to just having a geek thing when we think is good, we're not actually delivering something on the field. So that's why, even if we have a lot of other aspects to consider if a project is for good, that's the key important thing for us.
And Theo, in that case, do you completely skip the intensity part, which I would say is reducing the environmental footprint and other aspects as well? Or do you have some basic guidelines that you follow all the time?
Yeah, we have, because we have one good thing at Data for Good is that we were talking about that before. We now maintain a library in Python called Code Carbon that is helping us monitor the carbon footprint of what we do. And we are actually trying to do that the most that we can. It's not always feasible when you're working with volunteers because it's not a company. So sometimes people don't use it because they don't know how to use it and we cannot really train them. But we do that as most as possible. And what we actually found is that most of the time, because for all of those projects, it was not using generative AI. So like other AI algorithms that is basically statistics is not that heavy for computation. So even when we monitor it, it's cool because we can actually have this impact measurement of our actual impact, like the plus and the negative part of it. But at the end, it's actually changing now that we have generative AI. And if we had been creating a product where the generative AI was live and used by millions of users, that would be when the question would become so important that we actually would have some big decisions on do we kill it or not, or actually do we invent it or not, if we know that it will be deployed at such high scale. So we try to measure it, and one big part of it is not just not using some complicated algorithms in production or at all. That's all, like a good way of being sober is just not doing it.
Anastasis, Theo mentioned that to be efficient, to actually achieve its goal, a proper data for a good project should not be left only to geek. Is it something that you've practiced also? And do you have any good story to tell us about this?
Absolutely. So what we usually do, we are more business focused in the sense that our clients are corporates and businesses of any size that want to showcase and monitor their sustainability KPIs. So we connect into their data systems or we prepare their data infrastructure, and then we are able to extract all the sustainability data and more general ESG data of sorts. Through that, what we hope to achieve is to automate the process of how and leave the why to them. Why do they need to reduce their carbon footprint? Why do they need to improve their ESG performance? And then to help them throughout this process. In this sense, we are trying to use data to reduce their own footprints and to improve their own environmental, social, and governance performance. So their success is our success, and the tools they are using to implement these goals is something that's very close at heart to us. Through this process, we found that often than not, the need for AI comes in organically at some stage in the project. So we're always careful to avoid using it as a buzzword. But I do remember a specific example which shed some light in the way we can use AI at Dataphoria, and it was all about benchmarking. So we've had a particular case where the client wanted to see how they were performing against other peers in the industry with data that could not be found in specific databases or specialized ESG websites, but that was embedded in a number of sustainability reports. Most of these in a PDF format, a couple hundred pages long each. So when we started looking through there to find the right data, at one point we decided it was going to take a very long time, actually. So we tried to automate the process. We started with a few basic text analytics, and one thing led to another, and we found ourselves working through a text classifier and a way to extract this textual data in a very structured format. And now, when we're talking about technical data like carbon emissions, like intensity, base years, materiality topics, and all these, of course, this has to come with very specialized knowledge. So that was the point where we had to stop and discuss between ourselves, even at the small scale we were applying this at, whether the footprint, the impact of what we were hoping to achieve would surpass the impact of building this model and deploying this model itself. And we found this as a rule of thumb ever since.
Yeah, good rule of thumb. Makes total sense. Not easy yet, not easy all the time to assess how much your clients will actually save. But I guess having this order of magnitude to 1 to 10 protects you to minor estimation errors, I would say.
Absolutely, that's that's the engineer of me speaking. So yeah, that's the sort of case. We're never going to get it right. We just have to be certain.
You know, when I prepared this episode, I had very interesting discussion, very meaningful discussion with Johan Fall in Buster Franken, thanks to Anastasis' advice. And I remember Johan telling me, maybe AI will just become like electricity or fridge, a technology that is so obvious that it will become invisible, and we will not talk that much about it because we don't talk every day on about electricity or the fact that we are able to produce cool, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So, do you foresee this trend that AI will become, just AI, not a cool hype technology, but it's just AI, it's just electricity. What do you think about it? Starting with Lou.
Well, I think it's, as we were saying earlier in the podcast, I think it's already happening as we're already using it every day in our lives. Only like when you're going on the social medias, it's algorithm behind. When you're using internet, it's algorithm. So it's already everywhere in our lives. I'm sure. And sorry, what frightens me is the pace at which it's going right now, and the fact that nobody is questioning it, especially politicals. I think it's a subject that they're completely out of their reach and they don't understand, so they're not taking it seriously. While I believe we should, in a political instances, to take the subject to ask the question about the usages and the need that we have about those technologies, because they're spreading faster and faster, and we need to ask ourselves about our needs.
Maybe my idea around that is, especially with like this new word with generative AI, and it's not only a question of ChatGPT that is like the totem that we always talk about. It's a question about generated human readable content that is multimodal. So that means image plus text plus sound plus video plus whatever. That means that it's not a question about being like a real intelligence, but it's actually emulating how we are in this world, what we do in this world, and how we interact with things. And so as soon as you have that, and you're actually connecting pieces of like actions like reading and writing and so on, it becomes something that it's natural to have it embedded everywhere in our life if we just follow how it should like go, if we just listen to technocratic people. So it's logical that actually, yes, it can become obvious and invisible. For example, if you use Notion, there is now the AI part. Now it's labeled as AI because it's like the buzz. But at some point, it will be not. It will be something like the same thing that you use a keyboard and it writes for you and it helps you write faster. So it will be that because it's already that. And that's for sure. But is it like a good thing? That's another question. We always love to talk about Jacques Ellul and people that have been studying like technology, and they are like some researchers and social researchers are saying that a good technology has to be convivial. So that means that you cannot create a dependency to it, because at some point there will be a problem. And this is something that we already see. If you ask a developer right now, they are using GitHub Copilot and other AIs to write code. And I'm using it like 6 hours a day to write code faster. And now when I don't have it because there is a problem with my server, or I'm in a train and I don't have any networks, I know less how to code than before. But with it, I'm super faster. And this is a big question, because as soon as you create dependency, you make something that can create a lot of problems. So I don't know if it has to be obvious and invisible to be more of a force for good than a destructive force, but for sure it is happening already. And I agree that now it's a buzz, so it's labeled AI, but it will disappear at some point.
I would totally agree with Theo on that. And just to go back to the ages before writing was actually democratized, there were all these mnemonic devices and mind palaces and way of sustaining the most information you could within your own mind. And then writing became easier because of papyrus and parchments and other writing tools. It was certainly easier than writing things on stone tablets. And then there was a sort of disruption there and a sort of resistance from the society back then, because people would tend to forget how to remember stuff if everything was written down. But that was the way we passed knowledge from one generation to the other. And that was the way we could learn on the more, all the more, and use our mind for creativity instead of remembering lots of things. That's the analogy I would see for AI as well. It is a tool that, as Theo said, can free up our time for creative stuff, that can help us accelerate what we are actually doing and take off the burden. I would see it more as a tool, therefore more as an integration within our daily lives, the same way we have books, the same way we have phones, the same way we have other tools, calculators, you name it. But in order for it to be a force of good, not a destructive force, we need to set this trend in the right trajectory. That's what the European Union is aiming to do with the regulations about AI. That's what our generation should do as well. So, in order to make AI a force for good, in order to embed it the way it should be in our daily lives, we need more people like you, Theo, like Lou, like Gail, like you, dear listeners, to become part of this dialogue, part of the discussion, and act for positive change.
Thanks a lot, Anastasis. It resonates a lot, I guess, with a lot of the listeners as well, and definitely with me. And my last question, Lou, to close the podcast on a positive note, could you share one piece of good news which made you optimistic recently about a path toward a more sustainable world?
Okay, well, maybe you're gonna say it's not a good news, but I think it is. You were mentioning it at the beginning of the podcast, but today with Data for Good, we've been working on a project for several months about carbon bombs in the world. So this is not a fun topic, but I think what's positive about it is that we've had media coverage all around the world. And I think a few years ago, this would have never happened because people didn't care about those problems. And the fact that those medias are talking about those subjects in their front pages and selected them as their recommendation of the day and stuff. This is a positive thing, showing that medias are more and more getting aware about the subjects and trying to use the impact that they have to notify people and to inform to help us go in the right direction.
I will say a very geek good news. In the past week, there has been the release with Hugging Face that I was like saying that I loved a lot in at the beginning of the podcast. There was a release of a model called Zephyr 7B Beta, which is basically like a geek code name for a new large language model. So the kind of algorithm for generative AI that is free, open source, small, sober, with very like fast inference. So that means less energy consuming inference. That was a question I was explaining. And that is for the first time more performant than the things that I'm doing with GPT in production. So that means that for the people that are called in the field GPU poor, So the people that don't have a GPU to do AI, that means like 99.999% of the world, if you're not working at like a tech giant company, you can now have access for free and switch your actual model that you were using for AI to like a proprietary closed model to something that is open source and free and less energy consuming and created by people with different kinds of values, and something that you can actually fine tune, remove bias, audit, and so on. So that's actually for the first time that I've been using generative AI every day for a year in the past year. And now for the first time, I have something that I can put in my products that I actually trust a lot more, because I know I can control it in a way.
And what about you, Anastasis? What is the good news that you want to share?
Right. So a few weeks ago, we had significant news in the corporate sustainability reporting sector. So all over the EU, we are waiting for new sustainability reporting standards that would require a lot more companies, so 5 times more companies than today, to report on and reduce their carbon footprint and also the general sustainability performance. And part of this was put to a vote in the European Parliament, and there were some moves to hinder the vote and to reject the motion or set it back a couple of years at least by certain parties. And it was looking quite grim. It was quite unsure if this was going to pass. Obviously, if this doesn't pass, then the whole environment and sustainability progress is left 2 years behind. The very good news is that this passed with a majority. So we are continuing on as planned on the vision to become the first net zero continent. So that for me is great news. We shouldn't take it for granted, but people all over the place are working towards this same goal.
Well, it was a lovely chat, and it was great. Actually, it was a bit less technical than I would expected with geek like you are, but maybe it was because the right question to be asked is really the use of AI and this kind of ratio. I love Anastasis, the way you put it, like, multiply it by 10, otherwise doesn't worth it. And starting with the a real use case and all the tips that you shared about how Lou and Theo, about how with Data for Good you manage to create massive impact using AI, but actually using AI, which doesn't mean necessarily the latest, shiniest model. So thanks a lot. I really do mean it, the three of you. It was great talking to you. And as I mentioned, I hope that we will have some room in the Green IO conference hosted by Apidays to talk about Data for Good. I will try to convince some of my guests tonight to be with us in Paris. I'll let you know more in the next episode. Thanks a lot once again for joining the Green IO podcast tonight. Thank you for listening to this Green IO episode. In episode 29, we will talk about anthropology and geography and Anthropocene. And yes, it will still be a tech-focused episode, but taking a huge step back thanks to Maxime Blondeau. Yes, the one and only thought leader on geography and ecology and technology, who shares one map a day on LinkedIn to his 100,000 followers. Quick note for my European-based listeners. You are invited to the first Green IO conference in Paris on December the 8th for free. I partnered with Apidays to bring you an amazing lineup starting with Aurore Stéphant, Tristan Nitot, Theo Alves Da Costa, and all the teams involved in the 2023 Sustainable Digital Challenge. The link to register is in the episode notes. Hope to see many of you. And before you leave, a small message from our sponsor. No, I'm kidding. Green IO remains a free and independent podcast, and so we need your help to keep it that way. We have zero marketing budget, so you can support us by spreading the word. Rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple and Spotify, share an episode on social media or directly with a relative. That's a good idea also. Thanks for your support. It means a lot to us being me, but also Tani Levitt, our amazing podcast producer, and Gilles Tellier, our amazing podcast curator. And stay tuned by subscribing to Green.io on your favorite podcast platform or via the Green.io mailing list. The link is in the episode notes, but you already know the drill. Every 2 weeks, you will get more insights and premium content to help you, the responsible technologists scattered all over the world, build a greener digital world, one bite at a time.